There was a moment in the early Pacific War when American pilots climbed into the sky knowing, deep down, they were at a disadvantage. The year was 1942. Pearl Harbor still smoldered in memory. The Pacific stretched vast and unforgiving, and across its endless blue, a new predator ruled the air, the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M Zero. It was light, it was nimble, it was deadly. And for months, no Allied fighter could truly match it. Imagine being 22 years old, thousands of miles from home, flying over open ocean with nothing but steel, fuel, and faith between you and eternity. Knowing the enemy could outturn you, outclimb you, and perhaps outfly you. That was the reality. The Zero had already carved its reputation in China. It stunned American forces at Pearl Harbor. It dominated early engagements across the Pacific. It could range farther than most Allied aircraft, maneuver tighter, and in close dogfights it seemed almost untouchable. The F4F Wildcat, brave and rugged as it was, simply could not dance with the Zero on equal terms. American pilots learned quickly. Never try to outturn a Zero. Never get slow. Never get caught climbing vertically. Those who forgot paid the price. But here is something history teaches us again and again. America adapts. While the Zero was winning headlines in the sky, American engineers were already drawing the future. Before Pearl Harbor, Grumman Aircraft had been awarded a contract to design a next-generation carrier fighter. Initially envisioned as an improvement over the Wildcat, events in the Pacific made one thing crystal clear: improvement would not be enough. The United States Navy didn't need parity. It needed dominance. What emerged from Long Island's factories would not just compete with the Zero, it would dismantle its legend, the F6F Hellcat. It was not designed to be delicate. It was designed to win. Where the Zero sacrificed armor for agility, the Hellcat embraced survivability. Thick armor plating protected the cockpit. The windshield was bullet-resistant. Self-sealing fuel tanks dramatically reduced the risk of catastrophic fire, something the Zero fatally lacked. 6.50 caliber machine guns lined its wings, delivering a storm of firepower that could tear apart lightly built enemy aircraft in seconds. But the true heart of the Hellcat was its engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. 18 cylinders, over 2,000 horsepower, nearly twice the power of earlier naval fighters. Power changes everything. Power means climb rate. Power means the ability to dive out of danger and climb back into advantage. And in air combat, energy, altitude, and speed is life. On June 26, 1942, the first prototype Hellcat flew. Less than a year later, it was operational aboard American carriers. In wartime terms, that was astonishing speed, a testament not only to engineering, but to industrial determination. Entire factories pivoted to produce Hellcats at unprecedented scale. At peak production, 20 aircraft a day rolled off assembly lines. This was not just a new airplane. It was American industry weaponized. By October 1943, the stage was set. The Pacific War had shifted from desperate defense to measured counteroffensive. The new Essex-class carriers, fast, heavily armed, and built in numbers, formed the backbone of a new naval doctrine. Battleships no longer ruled the seas. Aircraft carriers did. And guarding those carriers was the Hellcat. On October 5, 1943, near Wake Island, the Hellcat would meet the Zero in combat for the first time. Ensign Robert Duncan, a young Navy pilot, knew the Zero's reputation. Every American pilot did. There was respect, even intimidation surrounding the Japanese fighter. It had earned that reputation in blood. As the morning sun rose, Duncan spotted a glint in the distance. A Zero. His radio malfunctioned, common in those early days. He couldn't warn his squadron. There was no time for hesitation. In combat aviation, there is a hierarchy. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Duncan did what instinct and training demanded. He maneuvered. He opened the throttle. 2,000 horsepower answered. The Hellcat surged forward. Closing fast, Duncan positioned himself for a deflection shot, leading the target firing not where the Zero was, but where it would be. 6.50 caliber machine guns erupted. The rounds struck the Zero's unprotected fuel tank. The Japanese fighter exploded. It was the first recorded Hellcat victory over a Zero. But the real test came moments later. A seasoned Japanese ace, Toshiyuki Sueda, engaged Duncan. The Zero pilot executed a classic maneuver, a steep vertical climb designed to lure American fighters into stalling beneath him. It had worked countless times against Wildcats. The heavier American aircraft would stall first, roll helplessly, and become easy prey. Sueda climbed confidently. Duncan followed. This time, however, the American fighter did not stall. The Hellcat's engine roared. Superchargers whined. Energy remained. As Sueda rolled over expecting a falling victim, he instead saw a fully powered Hellcat lining up behind him. Duncan fired. The Zero spiraled downward in flames. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in the Pacific sky. The Zero was no longer invincible. Wake Island was only the beginning. Over the next weeks and months, Hellcats escorted bombers, strafed installations, and engaged Japanese fighters across Rabaul and beyond. Each engagement reinforced the same truth. In speed, in dive, in durability, the Hellcat held the advantage. The Zero could still turn tighter at low speeds. It could still be deadly in skilled hands. But air warfare is not decided by turning radius alone. It is decided by energy, by tactics, by teamwork, and increasingly by numbers. And here, the United States possessed an advantage Japan could not match. By late 1943, American pilot training pipelines were producing thousands of aviators. The Imperial Japanese Navy, by contrast, could not replace experienced airmen at the same rate. Veteran pilots were irreplaceable, and attrition is merciless. The Hellcat arrived not only with superior engineering, but alongside a system capable of sustaining war. By the end of 1943, it was clear the balance of air power in the Pacific was tilting. The Zero had dominated the early war. The Hellcat was about to dominate the rest of it. And for a generation of Americans, those who had watched Pearl Harbor burn, who had feared Japanese expansion across the Pacific, this was more than technological progress. It was vindication. The sky was no longer surrendered. The sky was being taken back. If Wake Island proved the Hellcat could fight, the coming battles would prove it could dominate. November 11th, 1943. Rabaul. Rabaul was no minor outpost. It was one of Japan's strongest fortified bases in the South Pacific, bristling with anti-aircraft guns, protected by fighters and shielded by geography. Any assault would be costly. American carrier task forces approached with calculated precision. Dive bombers and torpedo planes prepared to strike. Above them, Hellcats formed protective screens. Lieutenant Junior Grade Hamilton McWhorter had already tasted combat. But what unfolded over Rabaul would elevate him into legend. As American bombers dove toward Japanese ships in harbor, Hellcats engaged swarms of enemy aircraft. The sky devolved into what pilots grimly called a furball, twisting contrails, flashing gunfire, aircraft climbing and diving in chaotic patterns. McWhorter spotted a Zero closing on a fellow Hellcat. He pulled into a high-G turn, his aircraft responding with authority. The R-2800 engine provided power the Zero could not match in sustained maneuvers. Closing rapidly, he fired. The Zero disintegrated. Moments later, another enemy fighter approached. Gunfire rattled his Hellcat, the sharp metallic crack of bullets striking metal, the kind of sound no pilot ever forgets. But the Hellcat absorbed the punishment. Armor and rugged construction did what they were designed to do. McWhorter dove. This was a maneuver informed by hard intelligence. Months earlier, American forces had recovered a nearly intact Zero in the Aleutians, the famous Akutan Zero. Testing revealed critical weaknesses. At high-speed dives, its control surfaces stiffened, its roll rate suffered. It could not follow a diving Hellcat safely. McWhorter used that knowledge. He plunged toward the ocean. The pursuing Zeros broke off, unwilling to risk structural failure. Emerging from the dive, he found himself behind another enemy aircraft. Seconds later, that Zero was falling in flames, 2 kills in less than a minute. Rabaul demonstrated more than individual heroics. It revealed a systemic advantage. Hellcat pilots entered combat with knowledge about enemy strengths, weaknesses, and proper tactics. They were trained not to dogfight blindly. They were trained to exploit energy, altitude, and teamwork. 1 week later, McWhorter became the first Hellcat ace. By early 1944, the momentum was unmistakable. Then came Truk Lagoon, February 16, 1944. Truk was often called the Gibraltar of the Pacific. It housed warships, supply vessels, airfields. Neutralizing Truk would cripple Japan's ability to project power across the Central Pacific. At dawn, waves of Hellcats launched from American carriers. Lieutenant Alex Vrasiu approached the atoll with confidence born of both aircraft and training. Unlike earlier in the war, American pilots now flew knowing they possessed the superior machine. Enemy fighters scrambled. Zeros descended from above. Vrasiu immediately recognized the threat: altitude advantage. If the Zeros maintained their perch, they could dive with speed and choose when to engage. So he did something decisive. He turned into them. A hard defensive maneuver minimized exposure and forced the Japanese fighters to commit. As the fight descended to equal altitude, the Hellcat's power and structure allowed aggressive maneuvers that strained the Zero's lighter frame. The engagement became brutal. Close range, relentless. Vrachu shot down one Zero, then another, then a floatplane variant. 4 kills in a single mission. Across truck, American Hellcats destroyed over 100 Japanese aircraft in the air, and dozens more on the ground. Bombers followed, sinking ships and dismantling infrastructure. Truck never recovered its former significance. The implications were strategic. Fast carrier task forces, protected by Hellcats, could strike at will. The Japanese Navy increasingly lacked experienced pilots and modern aircraft to contest these raids. American forces were not merely responding. They were dictating the tempo, and the Hellcat was the instrument of that control. By mid-1944, this dominance culminated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the largest carrier battle in history. On June 19th alone, Japanese forces lost hundreds of aircraft. American pilots dubbed it the Marianas Turkey Shoot. It was not mockery. It was a reflection of disparity. Hellcats intercepted incoming waves of Japanese aircraft with devastating efficiency. Superior radar coordination, disciplined tactics, and robust aircraft combined into overwhelming advantage. The Zero, once feared, was now outclassed. By war's end, Hellcats had shot down approximately 5,300 enemy aircraft. They accounted for roughly 75% of the U.S. Navy's air-to-air victories. The kill ratio stood at an astonishing 1-9-2-1. Those numbers are not abstractions. They represent carrier groups protected, amphibious landings shielded, sailors brought home, strategic momentum maintained. For Americans watching from home, reading headlines, scanning casualty lists, the Hellcat became more than metal and rivets. It became a symbol. Proof that industry, innovation, and determination could overcome early setbacks. Proof that the tide had turned. By 1944, Japanese air power was not what it had been in 1942. The veteran cadre of pre-war aviators, rigorously trained and battle-hardened, had been worn down by attrition. Replacement pilots often entered combat with far fewer flight hours than their American counterparts. The Imperial Japanese Navy could not replenish experience at the scale the United States could. And experience matters. American Hellcat pilots increasingly arrived at squadrons with 500 or more flight hours. They rotated home for rest and training assignments. They shared tactics. They refined doctrine. War is not static, it is evolutionary. The Hellcat fit perfectly into this evolution. It was forgiving to fly, stable as a gun platform, durable under fire. It allowed average pilots to perform well and skilled pilots to excel. In combat aviation, that combination is priceless. The Zero still possessed grace in tight turns at low speed. In a pure turning contest below 200 knots, it could remain dangerous. But American pilots were trained never to fight on those terms. They used boom and zoom tactics, diving attacks, high-speed passes, vertical maneuvers. They used teamwork, particularly the THAC weave, to neutralize threats. And above all, they used power. The R-2800 engine was a mechanical heartbeat of American air superiority. It propelled not only the Hellcat, but also other iconic aircraft. It represented a philosophy: more power, more reliability, more margin for survival. By late 1944 and into 1945, as American forces advanced across the Central Pacific toward the Philippines and Okinawa, the Hellcat continued its work. It escorted bombers, it struck airfields, it intercepted kamikaze aircraft, it shielded fleets. When Japanese pilots launched desperate suicide attacks, Hellcats met them in the sky, destroying many before they could reach American ships. Every interception saved lives. In the final tally, the Hellcat stood as the highest-scoring American naval fighter of the war. More than 300 Hellcat aces emerged. Thousands of engagements told the same story: rugged American fighter, disciplined tactics, overwhelming firepower. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the Pacific sky belonged firmly to the United States Navy. The Zero had been an extraordinary aircraft at its birth. Innovative, elegant, formidable. But war punishes stagnation, and Japan's industrial limitations prevented rapid evolution. Meanwhile, America's factories roared day and night, refining, improving, scaling. The Hellcat was not just a better airplane. It was a manifestation of national capability. For Americans over 35, 45, 65, those who grew up hearing stories from fathers and uncles who served, those who understand the weight of that generation's sacrifice. The Hellcat represents something deeply rooted. It represents resilience after shock. It represents turning fear into resolve. It represents a country that refused to remain outmatched. The men who flew it were not reckless daredevils. They were disciplined professionals, sons, brothers, husbands, entrusted with machines built by American hands. Every rivet hammered in a factory back home, every engine assembled on a production line, carried purpose. When those engines roared over Wake, Rabaul, Truk, and the Philippine Sea, they carried the sound of a nation fighting back and fighting forward. History often remembers grand strategies and famous admirals, but wars are won in details, in horsepower ratings, in armor thickness, in training hours logged, in split-second decisions made at 10,000 feet. The Hellcat brought those details together. It did not merely contest the Zero, it ended its reign. By the final year of the war, Japanese air power was shattered. The once feared Zero could no longer dictate engagements. The skies over the Pacific, from the Marianas to Okinawa, were dominated by American carrier air groups, spearheaded by the F6F Hellcat. Japanese air power was dying, and the Hellcat was its executioner. For a generation that understands the cost of global conflict, the Hellcat stands as a reminder. Superiority is not gifted, it is built, forged in steel, powered by industry, proven in combat. It was not the sleekest aircraft of the war. It was not the most glamorous, but it was the one that showed up, absorbed punishment, delivered firepower, and came home. Over 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed, a 1-9 to 1 kill ratio, 75% of the Navy's aerial victories. Those are not just statistics, they are a legacy. And for those who value strength backed by substance, for those who understand that turning points in history often hinge on innovation and resolve, the Hellcat is more than a fighter plane. It is a symbol of American resurgence in the Pacific, a machine that helped reclaim the sky, a warbird that helped win a war, and a legacy worthy of remembrance.